This is the story of how I found a photo of my wife getting fucked by her longtime friend. She had been cheating on me for 5 years. My name is Andrew, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought I knew everything about my wife, Sophie. We've been married for 6 years. Our life together felt stable, and nothing too flashy, but solid. She's always been my anchor, the steady, warm force that kept me grounded, or so I thought. The cracks started showing at her mom's house over Sunday dinner. We'd made it a tradition to have dinner with her parents once a month. It was usually pleasant enough, her dad talking about the latest golf game, her mom fussing over dessert, while Sophie and I stole quiet glances at each other, sharing inside jokes. But this dinner was different. It started innocently enough. Her mom, Eleanor, was reminiscing, pulling out old photo albums after the meal. It was something she loved doing, flipping through pages of memories and recounting the same stories we'd all heard a dozen times before. "Oh, this one," Eleanor exclaimed, holding up a photo of Sophie at a beach. She looked about 20, carefree and radiant. "This was taken this summer, Sophie, and oh, what was his name? That lovely boy, the one you spent all your time with back then." Sophie froze. The relaxed, easygoing smile she'd worn all evening vanished in an instant. "Mom," she said, her tone sharp, "that's not important." Eleanor, oblivious to Sophie's discomfort, waved her off. "Oh, not since Andrew should know about your old friend. What was his name? Marcus? Mark?" She snapped her fingers as if trying to remember. I laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension. I didn't know Sophie had an old friend like that. "What's the story?" But Sophie's expression stopped me cold. Her eyes flicked to me, wide and wary, and her cheeks flushed a deep red. "It's nothing," she said quickly. Just a friend from years ago?" Eleanor chuckled. "Oh, it was more than that. You two were inseparable that whole summer. I thought for sure you'd end up together." "Mom," Sophie snapped, cutting her off. "Seriously, it's not a big deal." The room fell silent. Her dad cleared his throat, trying to change the subject, but it was too late. The damage was done. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Sophie barely spoke, and when we got home, she went straight to bed without a word. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Who was this guy? Why had she reacted so strongly to her mom bringing him up? The next morning, over breakfast, I decided to ask her about it. "Hey," I said casually, "about what your mom said last night." "Andrew, don't," she interrupted, not even looking up from her coffee. "I'm just curious," I pressed. "It sounded like he was a big part of your life. Why haven't you ever mentioned him?" She sighed, finally meeting my gaze. "Because it's irrelevant," she said firmly. "It was a long time ago, and it doesn't matter now." Her tone left no room for argument, but it only made me more suspicious. Sophie wasn't one to shut down conversations like that, not unless she had something to hide. I decided to let it go for the moment, but the curiosity gnawed at me. Who was he? What had he meant to her? And why was she so desperate to avoid talking about him? Later that day, while Sophie was out running errands, I started digging. I felt a pang of guilt as I opened her laptop, something I'd never done before. But the questions in my mind were too loud to ignore. Her email was logged in. I typed Marcus into the search bar, feeling a strange mix of excitement and dread. At first, nothing came up. But then, in her archived messages, I found an email chain from 3 years ago. It wasn't long, just a few back and forth messages, but the name at the top was clear. Marcus. I clicked the thread, my heart pounding. "Hey," his first message read, "it's been a long time, but I saw your name in an article about your new job and couldn't resist reaching out. Hope you're doing well. Let me know if you'd like to catch up sometime." Her response was short, but friendly. "Marcus, wow. I can't believe you found me. Life's been good. Married now, actually. I hope you're doing well, too." The rest of the messages were vague, catching up about work and life. Nothing overtly suspicious, but one line in Marcus's final email stuck out like a knife. "I'm glad to hear you're happy, Sophie. You deserve it. I'll never forget that summer. It was one of the best times of my life." There it was again. That summer. What had happened between them? And why hadn't she told me about him, even in passing? I closed the laptop, my stomach churning. Sophie had always been open about her past. College, ex-boyfriends, everything. So why was Marcus such a secret? Over the next few days, I couldn't get Marcus out of my head. His name lingered like a faint echo, growing louder every time I thought about Sophie's reaction at dinner or the unease in her voice when I asked about him. She was hiding something, I was sure of it, but I didn't know what. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it really wasn't a big deal. Maybe Marcus was just some guy she'd grown close to for a short time. And it didn't mean anything now. But the way she'd shut me down so quickly, the way her mom's words had rattled her, that wasn't nothing. I started paying more attention to Sophie, watching for any signs that might give me a clue. She didn't seem any different. Still the same warm, loving woman I'd married. But every now and then, I'd catch her staring off into space, her lips pressed together like she was thinking about something she couldn't say. The questions in my mind grew louder, and eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to dig deeper. One night, after Sophie had gone to bed, I went back to her laptop. I knew it was a breach of trust, but the curiosity had become unbearable. I opened her email again, scrolling through the messages with Marcus, but there wasn't much else there. They hadn't spoken in years, at least not over email. I moved on to her social media. She wasn't very active, mostly photos of us, the dog, and a few updates about her job. But as I scrolled back further, I found something that stopped me cold. A post from 8 years ago, just a few months before we started dating. It was a photo of Sophie at a beach, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. They were both laughing, their arms slung casually around each other's shoulders. The caption read, "Best summer ever. Can't believe it's over. Miss you already." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. The man in the photo had to be Marcus. He looked different from what I'd imagined. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy smile that made him seem like the kind of guy everyone liked instantly. I couldn't deny that they looked good together. For a moment, I felt a pang of insecurity. Was this the guy Sophie's mom had been talking about? The one she'd thought Sophie would end up with? I closed the laptop and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photo. Sophie had never talked about this best summer ever, and now I was starting to wonder why. A week later, Sophie's mom called to invite us over again, this time for brunch. Sophie accepted without hesitation, but I felt a knot of unease in my stomach. I wasn't sure I could sit through another meal of cheerful small talk, pretending everything was fine. The drive to her parents' house was quiet. Sophie scrolled through her phone as I drove, occasionally chuckling at something she saw, but not bothering to share it with me. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye, wondering what was going on in her head. Did she know I was suspicious, or was she oblivious? When we arrived, her mom greeted us warmly, as always. "So good to see you both," Eleanor said, pulling Sophie into a hug before turning to me. "Andrew, you're looking well. How's work?" "Busy," I said, forcing a smile. We sat down at the table, and the conversation started innocently enough. Sophie's dad talked about his latest project in the garage. Eleanor asked Sophie about her job, and for a while everything felt normal. But then, as we were finishing our coffee, Eleanor turned to Sophie with a bright smile. "Oh, you'll never guess who I ran into at the farmer's market last week," she said. Sophie stiffened, her fork clattering against her plate. "Who?" "Marcus," Eleanor said cheerfully. "I almost didn't recognize him. He's filled out a bit since you last saw him, but he was just as charming as ever. He asked about you, of course." My heart skipped a beat, and I saw Sophie's face flush a deep red. "What did you tell him?" she asked, her voice tight. "Just that you were doing well," Eleanor said, oblivious to Sophie's discomfort. "I said you were happily married and living a lovely life. He seems so happy for you. Such a sweet boy. It's a shame you two lost touch." Sophie forced a smile, but I could see the tension in her jaw. "Yeah, it is," she said quickly, pushing her plate away. "Anyway, I should start clearing the table." She got up and started gathering plates, her movements brisk and almost frantic. I stayed seated, my mind racing. Marcus wasn't just a distant memory. He was still around, still asking about her. And Sophie's reaction told me that whatever had happened between them, it wasn't as irrelevant as she'd tried to make it seem. I decided then and there that I needed to find out the truth. The ride home was unbearably silent. Sophie stared out the window, her fingers fidgeting in her lap, while I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The weight of Eleanor's words hung between us like a storm cloud. Marcus wasn't just a memory. He was real, present, and somehow still orbiting Sophie's life. I couldn't stop replaying the scene at brunch, the way Sophie's face had flushed, how quickly she'd shut down the conversation. When we got home, she disappeared upstairs without a word, claiming she had work emails to catch up on. I stayed downstairs, pacing the living room as my thoughts churned. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than she was letting on. And now that I knew Marcus had reached out to her mother, I felt the pull to find out what else she wasn't telling me. I went to our shared computer, the one Sophie rarely used, and logged into our cloud account. She wasn't particularly cautious about passwords. I knew hers by heart. I searched for anything with the name Marcus, scrolling through files and folders that seemed innocuous at first. My heart pounded when I stumbled upon a folder titled Summer 2017. It wasn't hidden exactly, but it had been tucked away in a corner of her files I'd never had a reason to look at. I opened it, my chest tightening as I saw photo after photo of Sophie and Marcus. The pictures weren't scandalous. Most of them were group shots or candid moments of them at the beach or by a campfire, but the way they looked at each other told me everything. There was an ease, an intimacy in their smiles that felt uncomfortably familiar. In one photo, Marcus had his arms slung casually over her shoulders, and Sophie was laughing, her head tilted toward him in a way that made my stomach twist. There was more, though. Buried at the bottom of the folder was a video file. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the trackpad before I clicked play. The screen filled with a shaky shot of Sophie sitting on a picnic blanket, the ocean behind her. Marcus was behind the camera. I recognized his voice immediately. "Sophie," he said, his tone teasing. "Any final words before summer ends?" She laughed, waving a hand at the camera. "Don't be so dramatic." "Come on," he pressed. "You've got to give me something to remember you by." She rolled her eyes, but her smile was soft. "Okay, fine. I'll miss this. Everything about it. And I'll miss you, Marcus. You made this summer unforgettable. The video ended there, the screen going black. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. This wasn't just a friend from her past. He'd been someone important, someone she cared about deeply. And while I had no proof of what their relationship had been beyond the summer, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they'd shared still lingered, at least for him. I closed the laptop, my pulse pounding. The photo of them at the beach, the way she'd said she'd miss him, it felt too personal, too intimate. I wanted to believe her when she said he didn't matter, but everything I'd found told a different story. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Sophie slept beside me. I wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but a part of me was afraid of what she might say. What if their connection had been more than just a fleeting summer romance? And worse, what if it still was? The next day I decided to take a different approach. If Sophie wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. I started with Marcus's last name, which I'd seen in the archived emails. A quick search brought up his social media profiles, polished professional accounts that painted him as a successful entrepreneur. His posts were sparse, mostly business updates and the occasional motivational quote, but one caught my eye. It was a photo from a few months ago of him standing in front of a familiar building. My stomach churned as I realized it was the same office complex where Sophie worked. The caption read, "Excited for new opportunities in the city. Here's to reconnecting with old friends and making new ones." I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. He wasn't just in Sophie's past. He was here in the same city, possibly working in the same building. That explained her reaction at brunch. She wasn't just startled by her mom's mention of him. She was afraid I'd find out he was still in her life. When Sophie came home that evening, I tried to act normal, though my mind was racing. I asked her how her day was, listening carefully to her answers for any clues. She didn't mention Marcus, but I noticed she seemed distracted, her eyes darting to her phone more than usual. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Sophie," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I've been thinking about what your mom said at brunch." Her head snapped up, her eyes wary. "What about it?" "About Marcus," I continued, watching her carefully. "Why haven't you told me he's back in town?" Her face paled, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Then she forced a laugh, shaking her head. "He's not back in town. I don't even know where he lives now." It was a lie, I knew it, and she knew it. "Don't do that," I said quietly. "Don't lie to me, Sophie. I saw the pictures, the emails. I know more than you think." Her expression shifted, panic flashing across her face before she masked it with anger. "You went through my stuff?" she demanded, her voice rising. "That's such an invasion of privacy, Andrew. I can't believe you'd do that." "I wouldn't have had to if you'd been honest with me," I shot back. "Who is Marcus to you, Sophie? And don't tell me he's just an old friend, because I'm not buying it." Her jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought she might tell me the truth. But then she shook her head, grabbing her coat from the chair. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she snapped. "If you're going to act like this, I'm not staying here tonight." Before I could stop her, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there in the silence, my chest heaving with anger and frustration. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I stayed in the living room for hours after Sophie stormed out, my thoughts spinning in every direction. Her reaction wasn't just defensive, it was a complete deflection, a refusal to answer the simplest question. Who was Marcus to her? And why did it feel like he still held a place in her life that I was only now beginning to uncover? Around midnight, I decided I couldn't sit there anymore. If Sophie wasn't going to tell me the truth, I had to find it myself. I picked up her laptop again, scrolling through her emails and calendar. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, but I knew there had to be something. And then I found it. An event on her calendar from 2 weeks ago, marked simply as meeting. The location was a boutique hotel downtown, and the time was late, 8 p.m. My heart raced as I stared at the screen. Sophie had never mentioned anything about a late meeting, let alone at a hotel. Without hesitating, I grabbed my keys and drove to the hotel. It was a sleek, upscale place, the kind of venue people use for more than just business. My hands trembled as I parked and walked inside, unsure of what I was even hoping to find. The lobby was quiet, the polished floors gleaming under dim lights. I approached the front desk, trying to keep my voice calm. "Hi," I said. "I think my wife left something here a couple of weeks ago. She had a meeting, room 406, I believe." The receptionist raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "One moment," she said, typing into her computer. I held my breath as she scanned the screen. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, I see a reservation for that date. Under Marcus Walters." My stomach dropped. She hadn't even tried to hide it. "Was she here with him?" I felt my voice tight. The receptionist hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't disclose that information." I didn't need her to. I already knew. The drive home was a blur. My mind replayed everything. Sophie's reaction to her mom's comments, her defensiveness when I asked about Marcus, the way she'd stormed out tonight without even attempting to deny anything. It was all so obvious now, so painfully clear. When I got home, I decided to check her phone. She hadn't taken it with her when she left, and I knew this was my chance to find the truth. I scrolled through her messages, my heart pounding with every swipe, and then I found the thread. It was buried under a fake contact name, work update, but the messages left no room for doubt. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. You're insatiable, you know that? I still feel your nails on my back. My stomach churned as I read further, each message more explicit than the last. Marcus wasn't just some fleeting memory from Sophie's past. He was her present. The text painted a vivid, stomach-turning picture of what they'd been doing in that hotel room, and it wasn't business. I love how dirty you get when we're alone. You're nothing like the perfect wife he probably thinks you are. I slammed the phone down, my chest heaving. My hands shook as anger and humiliation surged through me. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd thrown everything we had away for something cheap, filthy, and meaningless. A sound behind me made me spin around. Sophie stood in the doorway, her face pale. I hadn't even heard her come in. Her eyes darted to the phone on the table, then back to me, widening as she realized what I'd found. "Andrew," she started, her voice shaking. "I can explain." "Don't," I snapped, my voice trembling with rage. "Don't you dare insult me with excuses. I know everything, Sophie. I know about Marcus, the hotel, the texts. I know what you've been doing behind my back." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her cheeks flushed, and for a moment I thought she might cry. But then her expression hardened, her defensiveness returning in full force. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said, her voice cold. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and broken. "That's all you have to say? Not an apology, not an ounce of regret, just that I wasn't supposed to find out?" She crossed her arms, glaring at me. "What do you want me to say, Andrew? That I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry, but maybe if you'd been paying attention to me instead of your damn job, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." Her words hit me like a slap. "So this is my fault?" I demanded, my voice rising. She shrugged, her tone dismissive. "I'm not saying that, but maybe if you'd made me feel wanted, this wouldn't have happened." "Wanted?" I repeated, incredulous. "You've got to be kidding me, Sophie. I've done nothing but love you, support you, and this is how you repay me? By sneaking around with him? By doing that?" I gestured to her phone, my voice cracking. She rolled her eyes, her composure slipping into something uglier, arrogance. "You don't get it, Andrew. You're predictable, safe. With Marcus, I feel alive. He makes me feel things you never could." Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. For a moment, I couldn't even speak, the weight of her betrayal crushing me. "Get out," I said finally, my voice shaking. She blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "I said get out," I repeated, my tone hardening. "Go to Marcus. Go wherever the hell you want. Just get out of my house." Her expression twisted, anger flaring in her eyes. "Fine," she spat. "You want me gone? Don't expect me to come crawling back when you realize you're nothing without me." She grabbed her coat and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, the silence deafening, my chest heaving with a mix of rage, pain, and disbelief. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd built my life around, was gone. Or maybe she'd never been real to begin with. The next few days felt like a blur, my emotions swinging wildly between rage, sadness, and a strange, hollow numbness. Sophie didn't come back. Not that I wanted her to. I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to look at her the same way again after what I'd uncovered. But the house felt empty without her, and I hated that I still noticed her absence. I kept replaying her words in my head, the coldness in her voice when she said Marcus made her feel alive. It wasn't just the betrayal itself that haunted me. It was how little remorse she showed, how easily she'd thrown everything we had away for someone who treated her like a dirty little secret. On the third day, I got a call from a mutual friend of ours, Claire, someone Sophie had known since college. She'd always been friendly with me, and I could tell by the hesitation in her voice that she knew something was wrong. "Andrew," she started, "I don't know if I should be calling you, but I felt like you should know." "Know what?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "It's about Sophie," she said, her tone cautious. "She's been seeing Marcus for months. I didn't want to get involved, but I found out a while ago, and I told her she needed to stop. I thought she had, but she didn't." I finished for her, my voice bitter. Claire sighed. "I'm so sorry, Andrew. I didn't want to believe it, but last night I saw her. She was with him at a bar downtown. They weren't exactly subtle." My grip on the phone tightened. I should have been furious, but by now I wasn't even surprised. Of course she'd run straight to him after leaving me. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, forcing the words out. "Are you okay?" Claire asked gently. "No," I admitted, "but I will be." After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. The image of Sophie with Marcus, laughing, drinking, probably making plans for their next sordid rendezvous, played in my mind like a taunt. She wasn't just gone. She'd chosen him over me, over everything we'd built together. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her take anything else from me. The next morning, I called my lawyer and started the process of filing for divorce. I wanted everything done quickly and cleanly. Sophie could have her fun with Marcus, but she wasn't going to drag me through the mud in the process. I went through the house, gathering anything of hers that she'd left behind. Clothes, books, trinkets, all of it went into boxes. As I packed, I found myself pausing over certain items. A framed photo of us on vacation, the anniversary card she'd written me 2 years ago, where she'd called me her rock and the love of her life. The words felt like a cruel joke now. I threw it all in the boxes, not wanting to keep a single reminder of her. By the end of the week, the papers were filed, and I sent her a message letting her know. Her response was exactly what I expected. Short, curt, and utterly lacking in regret. I figured this was coming. Fine, let's get it over with. She didn't ask about me. She didn't apologize, and in a way, that made it easier. A month later, everything was finalized. She walked away with little more than her clothes and a fraction of the savings. I kept the house, the car, and most importantly, my dignity. I haven't heard from her since, and honestly, I hope I never do. In the weeks that followed, I started to feel lighter, freer. The pain was still there, but it wasn't as sharp as it had been. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, threw myself into work, and even started going to the gym again. One night, as I sat in the living room with a drink in hand, I realized something. Sophie hadn't just betrayed me. She'd set me free. Free from her lies, her manipulations, and the constant feeling that I wasn't enough. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alive.